Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel where stories and other random things take center stage and imagination is prized above all. Happy Saturday. I hope you guys are having a fantastic morning and will continue to have a wonderful rest of your day. Welcome to today's video, and I'm super excited. I am reviewing an entirely new anime right now, and I'm a little bit late to this party, but I am finally in the bandwagon of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I found it really interesting after watching the reviews by Anime Americas, so I figured, it's on Netflix. I'm gonna watch it. So today I'm reviewing the first arc of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is Phantom Blood. Okay, let's see how we describe this arc. Let's see how we can summarize the basic plot of the arc. So, we follow our first JoJo, Jonathan Joestar, and basically, his father takes in Dio Brando to pay off a debt to Dario Brando to pay off a debt, and takes him in and basically raises him alongside JoJo. However, Dio and JoJo don't necessarily get along, and by the time that they do, it's more like a bit of it fake especially on Dio's part. But JoJo is kind of an interesting character in a way. So anyway, but yeah, he takes him in and they raise him together. However, Dio wants to inherit the Joestar fortune. So he does everything in his power, and I mean everything, to make JoJo look bad in front of his family and friends. He does slowly start stealing things JoJo can appreciate. There's a bunch of things that happen, and the saddest part has to do with a dog. Come on now, the puppy. Why would you do that? So he tries everything to make JoJo look bad. Eventually they kind of start supposedly getting along, but barely. And that's what makes it kind of interesting. However, eventually, seeing that JoJo is about to turn him into the police due to the action of, attempting to murder George Joestar, Jonathan's dad, he ends up taking this mask. He ends up murdering George. George ends up being murdered. He takes this like stone mask and I think he uses George's blood and basically turns himself into a vampire. I don't know the full mechanics of how that works. I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around some of the mechanics, but I have learned not to question anime logic, especially JoJo logic, because some of the things that come up are very interesting, and some of the things that come up are just like, okay, oh wow, there are birds outside my window or somewhere nearby. I like their sound, but it turns out I am allergic to birds, guys, and cats. So anyway, the rest of the arc is basically Jonathan Joestar, or JoJo, going on a quest to defeat Dio, who basically decides to go on a journey of world domination, and ends up to defeat him and destroy the mask. What's interesting about this arc is just like how bizarre and hilarious it can be at times. I did enjoy my time watching it. I do have my criticisms, but I really did enjoy my time watching it. It is hilarious. It actually kind of reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh! And in the way of exposition, because there is a lot of monologuing and exposition here. It reminded me of like the classic exposition that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has when it comes, but without like the friendship speeches. But like there's like a lot of exposition when it comes to explaining pretty much everything that happens. Now I want to talk about exposition for a little bit because it's everywhere in this arc. Exposition and monologuing in this arc is everywhere. It's not something that that we get away from, right? It's everywhere. I find that when I watch TV and even when I read, there's like useful exposition, there's like exposition dumping, and then there's just useful for different reasons, right? So, useful exposition is like things that you need to know, but they're not dumped for you in a way that's like an exposition dump. Exposition dumps are kind of like the one thing that comes up, the first thing that comes up as exposition dumping for me is, as much as I love it, George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. There is a lot of exposition dumping. There are things, we get descriptions for everything. Even the things, the food gets described, everything gets described all the time. The people, their banners, like everything gets described all the time, and most of the time none of that stuff makes sense. So it's almost like you're asked to remember all this stuff, but it doesn't usually come up in the story all the time, right? So there's a lot of exposition dump in the series of A Song of Ice and Fire. So like that's like the first thing that comes up. JoJo's exposition is funny but also useful because I am blind and they kind of explain some of the visual stuff for me. So it's kind of like getting audio description in the form of exposition. It's interesting. I don't know. That's just me. It's interesting to me. So I can appreciate the exposition that comes with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure because of that. So I enjoy it, but it's a lot of it, but I enjoy it. It's funny. And JoJo is kind of funny because he's trying to be a gentleman. Like his idea of being a gentleman is like even fighting for a woman's honor, even if you know you can't win. And there's a scene of that with Arena, who is kind of his childhood friend, which Dio later ruins by doing the one thing I hate in every storybook I read. I hated it in Eclipse. I hated it in like the first two or three chapters of, I think it's Bittersweet Love by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I hated it in both The Duke and I and The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. And that is unconsensual anything. It didn't lead to assault in JoJo, but I think in the very first episode, to try to ruin everything for JoJo, one of the things that Dio does is he takes Arena's first kiss. And I really mean takes. Like there's no, like, I'm gonna be your friend. There's no like luring her into anything. There's no seduction, nothing. He forces a kiss on her, which obviously freaks her out. I mean, as a woman, I was like, sweet Arena. Because Arena is adorable. Like, but the thing is, I do have a criticism on Arena, but I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But basically, Arena's cute, okay? Arena's interesting. And he forces her, and I read like episode recaps on this, and it says that and she can't look at JoJo in the eye now, which feels kind of bad and sad. And they end up like actually rekindling their relationship later on. And he's like, he ends up leaving for this quest. JoJo ends up leaving to defeat Dio, and he's like, okay, I'll see you when I come back, right? So some of my criticisms of the show, my main criticism of the show actually has to do with Arena. But before I do this, I do want to say that the pacing of this is like really fast pacing, but also really good because it does keep up. So it doesn't drag on. And because it doesn't drag on, things happen fast, but they're not like terrible. This is kind of like stepping into a story. There's not like a lot of world building. This takes place in 1888. And all the supernatural stuff. There's like not a lot of world building. You're kind of like dipping your toes into the water. And it had an ending I was not expecting at all. Like the tragic ending. I did not expect that tragic ending at all. But it all comes back in Battle Tendency, it seems. And I'll talk about all of that in Battle Tendency because it all connects. But I want to do this spoiler free. So it's really interesting. I'm going to spoil a little bit. But you'll see. But yeah, it's really interesting how that actually comes up. I find it to be a bit odd, but also not terrible. You know, it's like, okay, the pacing is interesting. There's a lot of things that I do criticize though, and that is how quickly some of the characters go to JoJo's side. So one of the characters that comes up is Robert E.O. Speedwagon, and it turns out he's you know, he is a guy who's very street smart, but also not. He's kind of like a bit of a criminal, it seems, in this show. And then JoJo impresses him, and he's like, I need to know the name of the guy who has spared my life, because they were fighting, and he ended up sparing Robert Speedwagon's life. And he's like, I need to know, right? And he tells him the name, and he's like, okay, I'll help you with your quest. And then he shows up at the end, at some point, to tell him, you know, Dio is evil. He was born evil. Like, his kind of evil is not something you have to worry about. And by the way, a lot of the exposition comes from Robert E.O. Speedwagon, and that's interesting to me, that a lot of the exposition comes from him. And it's like, okay, you know, all right, fine. But Speedwagon does very little in this arc, but like, it's really interesting how quickly he just turned into JoJo's side. Another thing I find that I criticize has to do with Erina, and that is that she doesn't really play a part in this, even though she seems to be extremely important, because by the end, I'm spoiling the part of the ending here, but by the end, JoJo and Erina marry. And there's very little to like solidify their friendship. Like, they're childhood friends, but there are only like 2 scenes that kind of see them do things. And after Dio's taking of Erina's first kiss, they barely talk. And then after that, they only talk once. Right? So there's very little. And he ends up marrying Erina, and it's like, but their marriage, their romance is not earned. And if it happens off screen. So it's not earned. And I just did not like it. I did like the way it kind of ended. It was very interesting. The ending is kind of tragic and sad, but it's really interesting. But those were my spoiler-free thoughts on this. I'm not gonna do a spoiler section, because anything I'm going to spoil, I'm gonna do later on in another review, probably in the battle tendency. But this is my thing. Like, these are my first few thoughts entering JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The exposition, hilarious. The monologuing, also hilarious. But these are things I just needed to know. Like, Erina just feels kind of there. Like, she's just there to be kind of almost like a prop, to be JoJo's wife in the end. And also extend the Joestar bloodline. So, yeah. I don't know when I'll be reviewing Battle Tendency, but hopefully I'll do so soon. Let me know your thoughts on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, this first arc. Don't spoil the rest of the arcs, please, but let me know what you think about this arc. Subscribe if you're interested in more content from me. And I'll be back next week with a writing update, I think. So, I think it's a writing update. So, yeah. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Yeah, see you in my next video, and consume stories.